All right, hello and welcome to this training. As you can see from the title, what we're going to be covering today is the hidden power of writing and why it will transform your life. As you can see from the overview, what we're going to be talking about more specifically is first the overview itself, right? Why writing rewires your entire mind, the real world benefits you'll actually feel, how to start writing today even if you hate it, the review, and then your action items for the day or the next few days. So before we get started, if you want to work with me one-on-one, make sure to book a call from the link in the description. If you want this document along with the training, then make sure to join the free community from the link in the description. And if you want weekly newsletters on how to improve in every aspect of your life, meaning health, wealth, love, and self, then make sure to join the free newsletter from the link in the description. With that said, let's get started and talk about why writing rewires your entire mind. So there's something that almost every high performer, every sharp thinker, every person who seems to just get it does on a daily basis. And it's not meditation, it's not cold plunges, it's not some expensive biohacking protocol. As you might have guessed it already, it is writing. I know that sounds almost too simple, but if you stay with me, you'll understand why this is probably one of the most underrated habits in all of self development. And by the end of this, you're also going to understand exactly why. So, I've spent a lot of time studying what makes certain people operate at a different level. And at this point, I have worked with artists, entrepreneurs, athletes, traders, and high performers from wildly different fields. And this keeps showing up over and over again as a common thread. Just the act of sitting down and putting thoughts on paper. Now, most people think of writing as something you do for school or work, and once that's done, they never really pick it up again. As a side note, most people think of reading in the same way. But what most people don't realize is that writing is one of the most powerful tools you have for actually understanding what's going on inside your own head. It's the one thing that basically forces you to sit down and actually think about what you're thinking. And it forces your scattered thoughts into some kind of order, right? When you sit down and write, something interesting happens where all of those half formed ideas and worries floating around in your head suddenly have to become actual words on a page, right? And that process alone forces you to think more clearly than you probably have in weeks. And the thing is, when you're writing, you naturally start organizing your thoughts into something that makes sense, which means you're essentially training your brain to process information better every single time you do it. Now, over time, this habit of structuring your thoughts on paper basically starts bleeding into how you think in general. And you'll notice yourself being sharper in conversations and quicker at solving problems you would have overthought before. And that's really the thing. Writing keeps pulling your attention back to one idea at a time, which is honestly something most of us barely do anymore with how distracted we've all gotten. It forces you to focus on whatever is in front of you, which is the writing itself. Plus, when you're searching for the right word or the right way to say something, you're actually sharpening your ability to think with more precision in every other area of your life, too. And building on that, writing also does something that almost nothing else does, which is it forces you to confront what you're actually thinking and feeling instead of what you think you should be thinking or feeling. I hope that makes sense. So, you don't need a therapist to tell you who you are if you're writing down what's in your head every single day. The patterns, now, this is not to say anything against therapy, by the way, but the patterns reveal themselves and you start seeing your own reality for what it actually is by just sitting down and analyzing everything that's happened and writing it down, forcing yourself to basically put those thoughts into reality in a way, writing them down on a piece of paper or digitally, whatever it is, thinking about what you're going to write, thinking about what you're thinking, thinking about what you're feeling, and actually writing it down on paper or digitally is what will allow you to basically see through your own thoughts, through your own feelings, and analyze them and analyze where they're coming from and their roots. And this kind of daily reflection, even just 10 minutes of it, will create a feedback loop where you're constantly checking in with yourself and adjusting course before things get out of hand. Now, beyond clarity, there's this other piece that people really overlook, and that's the fact that writing literally stimulates your brain to think in ways that just sitting around and pondering never will. Sitting around and actually thinking, most people don't do that either, but that's beneficial. However, writing down what you're thinking is something that sitting around and just thinking will not do. The benefits of writing down what you're actually thinking. So, the physical act of actually putting words on paper or on a screen triggers certain neurons in your brain that get the whole system fired up. And once that happens, you'll find that ideas start flowing that you didn't even know were there initially. And that initial activation creates this momentum where even if you started with nothing to say, within a few minutes, you've got a half page of thoughts that actually surprise you. And what's really interesting here is that studies have actually found that even lying or exaggerating during a free writing session boosts your creativity. So the barrier to entry is basically zero. You can just make up stuff, essentially. You don't even necessarily have to write everything down exactly as it is about your day, for example. And then there's the fact that writing helps you process things you've learned or experienced in a way that just reading or listening never quite does, which is why so many of the most effective people throughout history kept some form of a journal or a daily writing practice. And when you write something down in your own words, you essentially assimilate and structure that knowledge in a way that sticks instead of it just passing through you and disappearing within a few days. Now you have a running log of everything that you've thought about, felt, and so on. And it never disappears unless, obviously, you throw out the notebook or you delete the document on which you wrote it. But over time, all that accumulated writing becomes this incredible resource where you can actually look back and see how your thinking has evolved, how your feelings have evolved, how your learnings and lessons and improvements have evolved, and how your wins as well, your achievements have evolved. And then you can connect dots that you never would have connected otherwise. So it's really a compounding thing because the more you write and process, the more material you have to draw from the next time you need to solve a problem or explain something clearly, and the next time you need to write and process. And so you can reference back to older memories, to older thoughts, older feelings to explain current problems and current things you're dealing with, and current hardships in expressing what you actually feel or think. And so, honestly, one of the most underrated benefits of all of this is what it does to your stress levels, which is something that most people don't associate with writing at all. When you take all of those things that are constantly hitting your head and you put them down on paper, you're essentially taking them out of your mind, and the rationalization process that happens while you write produces this amplified calming effect that just thinking about your problems never gives you. So instead of carrying around this invisible weight of unprocessed thoughts and worries, you've offloaded them onto something external, and that alone frees up an enormous amount of mental energy. And what that gives you is really a sense of control over your own inner world, which is really what most stress comes down to in the first place, feeling like things are happening to you instead of being handled by you. And that reduced stress directly connects to making better decisions, which makes sense when you actually think about it. And it directly leads to processing your emotions, processing your feelings, and having better thoughts as well and better thinking, right? Because when your mind is clearer and less cluttered, you naturally see situations for what they actually are and respond instead of react. And writing gives you that pause between stimulus and response, especially if you do it mid situation, like in the middle of something happening, right? Um, and most people desperately need that space. Most people, something happens to them and they react immediately. There's no space between stimulus and response. And like Viktor Frankl said, our freedom lies in the space between stimulus and response. And most people desperately need this. And it does it in a way that's completely free and available to you anytime by just writing. And the more consistently you actually do it, the more natural it becomes to approach problems with a calm and clear head, which compounds over months and years into a genuinely different quality of life. Now, with that said, let's actually cover the real world benefits you actually feel if you start writing more often. So, now that we've covered what writing does inside your head, what it does in your day to day life is honestly amazing. And this is where it also gets practical because the benefits of writing show up in your communication, your productivity, your goals, and honestly, even your happiness. And the best part is you don't really have to be a good writer to experience any of this. In fact, how good you write has nothing to do with this. It's just the act of writing that matters. One of the first things you'll notice when you start writing regularly is that you become a significantly better communicator. And that shows up everywhere from your conversations to your emails to the way you explain complex ideas to other people. When you write, you naturally search for more complex and precise words to describe what you're actually thinking about. Because communication and what you're thinking about and feelings and the feelings that you're having, communicating them properly is actually a pretty difficult task. Communicating them in a way that the other person can actually understand exactly what you're thinking about or exactly what you're feeling is actually very difficult if you think about it. Finding the right words to express something like a feeling which is pretty vague is pretty difficult to do. But when you're writing, you have to do it. You essentially are forced to search for those precise words to describe what you're actually thinking about and what you're feeling. And that builds your vocabulary and your ability to express yourself in ways that people actually understand and remember. So sometimes when you're writing, you might look for a word or a phrase to express exactly how you're feeling or what you're thinking about. And you might even have to search for that word or phrase online. You might have to actually pop out the dictionary and actually look at the words there so you can find a word that accurately describes exactly what you want to say. And that will build your vocabulary over time naturally, right? And what's really interesting is that this doesn't just help you in writing, it carries over directly into how you speak and how you present yourself in person as well, which makes a real difference if you're a coach or consultant or creator or anybody for that matter who needs to land points clearly and communicate clearly. And the thing is, everything in life comes down to communication between people. We live with other people. So anybody would really benefit from clearer communication. Now, over time, this daily practice of finding the right words will train your rhetoric in a way that nothing else really does. And you'll start noticing that you can explain things in one sentence that used to take you five. And all of that better communication naturally leads to more influence, better influence, because people listen to and trust someone who can actually articulate their ideas with clarity and also with conviction. And you'll get conviction if you know how to express yourself. So the clearer you communicate, the deeper your connections with other people become. And that applies to personal relationships just as much as with professional ones. And for anyone building a brand or a business, this is probably the single most valuable skill you can develop because your ability to communicate is basically your ability to lead and to sell and to serve. Your ability to actually communicate is really what puts money in your pocket and basically creates your life essentially at the end of the day. People genuinely follow the person who can say what they mean and mean what they say and can actually articulate and express themselves accurately. And writing every day is how you build that muscle until it becomes second nature. Now, shifting to something a bit more tangible, writing also has a massive impact on how much you actually get done in a day. So it has an impact on your productivity as well. And it works in a few different ways that most people never really think about. The act of writing first thing in the morning, for example, triggers your brain and gets it ready to tackle everything else on your list, almost like a warm up that primes you for the real work ahead. And when you write down your tasks with the right words and the right intention, you're also mentally preparing yourself to handle them properly instead of just stumbling through your to do list on autopilot. So, what happens is you go into your day with a lot more clarity and a lot more purpose, and that translates directly into getting more done with less wasted energy and less second guessing. So, you not only increase your productivity, but you increase your efficiency as well. And building on that, research has actually found that writing down your goals significantly increases your chance of actually achieving them, which is one of those things that sounds too simple to be true, but the data backs up completely. Now, when you constantly write about what you want and how you plan to get there, those goals never fade into the background the way they do when they're just floating around in your head. A lot of people completely forget about their goals after a day or two, and that's mostly because they just keep them in their head. But you can't forget about your goals if you write them down every day. And if you write them down every day and you can't forget them, then you're more likely to work on achieving those goals because they're front of mind, right? And over time, that written record also becomes its own form of accountability where you can actually look back and see whether you're actually making progress or just telling yourself you are. And then there's the part that honestly matters most, which is that all of this, the clarity, the reduced stress, the better decisions, the progress on your goals, the clarity and thinking adds up to you basically being a genuinely happier person. And there's this real sense of fulfillment that comes from taking what's inside you and putting it somewhere tangible. And it doesn't matter if no one ever reads it, because the act of writing itself is what does the work. It doesn't even matter if you read it, really. So, writing keeps you present with your own life in a way that scrolling on your phone or consuming content or just talking never will. And that presence is really where your happiness lives. And when you look back at months or years of writing, you see your own growth in a way that's undeniable. And that's a powerful thing to have access to whenever you need a reminder of how far you've actually come. And there's something that I think is really underappreciated. If you write every day, you end up with this historical record of all of your thoughts, all of your feelings, all of your goals, your achievements, the books you've read, the lessons you've learned, the improvements you made. And honestly, that's something way more interesting and valuable than any photo album, right? Your future self will thank you for it when they can just sit down and read through what you went through and see how much stronger you got and how much progress you made. And who knows, maybe one day all that writing turns into a book or a course or something you give to your children or something you give to your grandchildren, or something that just helps other people too. I'll never forget reading through my grandfather's journals from the time when he was in the army, basically younger than me at this point. And it was one of the most interesting and most valuable things that I have held in my hands, right? And this is really just the natural next step when you've been building this kind of archive for long enough, is just that it will help other people eventually too. Or at least give them some sort of memory at the very least, just like with my grandfather's journal. So let's talk about how to start writing today, even if you hate it. So, the big question, how do you actually start doing this, especially if writing has never really been your thing or you've tried before and it just doesn't stick? Well, the good news is there's a method that makes this ridiculously easy, and it comes from a book called Accidental Genius, but by Mark Levy. And he calls it free writing, and it's basically the lowest barrier to entry that you'll ever find for building a writing habit. Now, the core idea behind free writing is that you sit down and you write whatever comes to your mind with absolutely no rules, no limitations, no pressure to make it sound good or be grammatically correct or follow any kind of structure at all. Your punctuation doesn't have to be right. Your grammar doesn't have to be right. You just sit down and just scribble away, basically. Now, the reason this works so well is that it removes all the resistance most people feel towards writing, because you're literally giving yourself permission to write badly. Now, a lot of people have this resistance towards writing because they expect themselves to be perfect in it, and to express themselves perfectly from the get-go. However, that doesn't happen immediately, right? You have to write for a while before you can do that. Over time, you improve in writing as well, just like with anything else. So it's just about actually sitting down and starting doing it. And the only way to do that is to really reduce the stakes as much as possible. So you're giving yourself permission to write badly, and that's exactly the point. When you stop worrying about whether it's good enough or good at all, whatever that means, you tap into a flow that you never get access to when you're trying to be perfect. And that flow is where all the real insights and breakthroughs live. And the funniest thing is that people try to be perfect even though nobody will be reading what they wrote down except for themselves. So why do you need to be perfect in that? In fact, it would be better if you start imperfectly and just write things down as they come and improve over time and see your improvement in writing over time as well, because that becomes its own kind of log, right, or archive of how you've improved your writing over time. So think of it as almost a conversation with yourself on paper, where you can basically ask questions and answer them, and you can change topics midstream, and you can just follow wherever your mind goes without any judgment at all. And one of the key rules, Mark Levi, or Mark Levy, I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce his family name. One of the key rules he suggests is to really write fast and fluidly, making quantity matter more than quality. Because when you're moving quickly, you don't really have time to second guess yourself, and that's exactly when the best stuff comes out. So the whole point is to capture every single thought and feeling while it's still fresh in your mind. And if you want to clean it up or turn it into something polished later, you always can. And editing and polishing is a completely separate act. It's a completely separate activity from writing. Even writers know this. Actual professional writers know that editing comes second. First is the writing, and editing is next. And typically they have multiple rounds of writing and editing before they publish a book, right? So the point is to capture every single thought and feeling while it's still fresh in your mind, and not to second guess yourself, not to try to be perfect. And what you'll find that is that after just a few minutes of fast writing, you've got material that genuinely surprises you. Basically, ideas and connections that your conscious mind would have never produced if you were sitting there trying to think them up and try to be perfect and express them perfectly. Because it's better to write them down, even imperfectly, and then go back to them and polish them and see the connections you made, rather than miss the connections your brain would make if you just tried to be imperfect, if you just didn't try to be so perfect, right? So there's this thing that happens when you write without a filter, where your subconscious basically takes over, and the stuff that comes out is often way more honest and way more useful than anything you'd write if you were trying. Now, the second piece of this is actually building the habit, which is where a lot of people fall off. And the simplest way to handle that is really to set a short time limit that makes it almost feel impossible to fail, right? So start with just 5 minutes a day or less. Like you could do a minute a day, you could do 2 minutes a day. And if you enjoy it, you can always increase it later. But the key is to really make the initial commitment so small that there's no reasonable excuse not to do it. A lot of days I don't necessarily feel the urge to write. I write every day, but a lot of days I don't necessarily feel like it. And yet, on those days, I just basically tell myself I should write one sentence. One sentence is unreasonably small. And so there is no reason to not do it. And typically, when I write the first sentence, of course, I continue. And that's basically how I trick myself into writing every day. But this is the idea here, right? You want to reduce the commitment as much as possible to get yourself over the hump. And then from there, you can continue or stop whenever you feel like it. And what happens is that in those 5 minutes or 4 minutes or 3 minutes or 2 minutes, whatever, though they compound over time into something massive, because 1,005-minute sessions is still 1,000 sessions of training your brain to think more clearly and process more deeply. Plus, the time limit actually helps you write faster and with less filtering, because you have 5 minutes to basically put everything on a piece of paper or on the digital document, and you can't be filtering yourself, because otherwise the timer will run out and you will have written nothing, which is exactly what you want, right? You want to push yourself to write as much as possible in those 5 minutes, to capture every thought and feeling that is coming into your presence, essentially, and basically write it down. And before you know it, those 5 minutes will start stretching to 10 or 15 on their own, because you're actually enjoying it, right? You're enjoying expressing yourself, maybe for the first time in a long time. And there's also this psychological benefit to having that timer running too, because it creates a gentle urgency that pushes you past the resistance and into the actual work, which is really where everything starts clicking. So the hardest part of writing is always the first 30 seconds. And a short timer takes that problem off the table completely. Now, once it's part of your daily routine, it will stop feeling like a task and feel more like maintenance, the same way brushing your teeth does, where you just do it without thinking about it because you know what happens when you don't, right? Your thinking becomes foggy, fuzzy, and so on. And finally, here are a few practical tricks that will make the whole thing even easier to stick with, especially in those early days when you're still figuring out what to write about. Now, one of my absolute favorites is to write a letter to your past self, because you can use the free writing process to tell your 10-year-old or 15-year-old self everything you wish you had known back then, or everything that has happened since then, and every lesson that you've learned since then. Now, that exercise is incredibly powerful for clarifying your own values, your own lessons for your improvements that you want to make in life, and as well as any achievements that you've made in that time, right? When you write as if you're teaching someone younger, you naturally organize your thoughts in a way that's clear and actionable, and you often discover that you know a lot more than you thought you did. And there's also a real emotional payoff too, because you end up feeling grateful for how far you've come and become more motivated to keep going, which is exactly the kind of energy you want fueling your daily practice and your day in general. Now, another great trick is to just make stuff up because, like we talked about earlier, studies have shown that lying or exaggerating during your free writing actually boosts your creativity. So, if you can't really think of anything to write about, just tell a wild fictional story about yourself or completely exaggerate how your day went. Like, make it completely bonkers. Now, this all takes pressure basically off of you and turns writing into something genuinely fun, which is the fastest way to make any habit stick long term. In fact, as a challenge to you, when you start writing, try to make yourself laugh as you write. Exaggerate so much, make the day so funny that you can't help but laugh yourself at what you're writing down. And at the end, you'll be amazed at how often those fictional sessions end up revealing something real and actually useful about how you think and what you actually care about, which circles right back to that awareness piece we covered at the very beginning. So, with that said, let's go over the review. We talked about the overview, we covered why writing rewires your entire mind, the real world benefits you'll actually feel, how to start writing today even if you hate it, the review, and your action items for the day or the next few days. First, set a timer for 5 minutes tomorrow morning and free write whatever comes to mind with zero rules and zero judgment, just to prove to yourself how easy this actually is. Pick one time of the day that works for you and protect it as your daily writing window, even if it's for just 5 minutes, and do it every single day for the next 30 days without exception. And finally, keep everything you write in one place, whether that's a notebook or a digital document, so that over time you build a personal archive that you can look back on and see exactly how much your thinking and your life has changed. With that said, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope it brought a lot of value. If it did, make sure to subscribe, like the video, comment below what you'd like to see next. If you want to work with me one-on-one, make sure to book a call from the link in the description. If you want this document along with this training, as always, please join the free community. We also host free coaching calls every single week. And if you want weekly newsletters on improving in every aspect of your life, meaning health, wealth, love, and self, then make sure to join the free newsletter from the link in the description. With that said, thank you for being here. Thank you for all the support, and I'll see you in the next one.